Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker with a sinus infection, so I sound weird.
Yeah, that's what
Not
it
the
is.
microphone.
Yeah.
The sinus
Yeah.
infection.
There's no filter for that. You got video filters, but there's no sinus infection filter to make your voice sound normal.
That's a
Yeah.
good point. Why isn't there some kind of audio filter thing for
I don't know.
like that should be a thing. And that one would theoretically be a lot easier than the video filters.
Some of those the tech is getting insane. I saw something I guess about 2, 3 weeks ago, and it was this woman. She was maybe 30, 35 or so. She had three different jobs. They were all virtual, and she used deepfake images for each one. So when she did Zoom meetings, like in one, she was like an Indian or Pakistani guy. Like it completely changed her. And like
Wow.
each one of those like gave her a totally different visual and audio thing. And like so you literally you don't know who you're talking to anymore
The thing
anywhere.
is, I can foresee the way our culture is currently. I could foresee a time where people are going to say, "Look, this is me. This is who I am. I'm this person, this persona." We've actually had people who identified as like their online game characters and stuff. Like that's the only identity they respond to anymore. So I could see a
Well,
time where
I
somebody's going to
am
say, "Look, I am
actually,
this
You seen
Pakistani
that
man."
there's um there's a thing now they call it, it's actually, Christine, you might have actually heard about this. They're starting to come out with Chat GPT syndrome because Chat GPT is like so like polite and nice to you and makes you sound like if you ask it a question about philosophy or something and it'll be like, wow, that's really insightful. And you're like it. And so people are starting to
Yeah,
like
talk like
almost
that.
become like
complete
enmeshed
sycophant.
with Chat GPT to the point where they're like telling their spouses that if like they can't get on board with what Chat GPT is telling them, that they might have a problem. Like after years and years of marriage, it's crazy.
Wow.
Do
Not
you guys
He
when you
likes
enter
you.
a prompt in one of these, do you say please and thank you?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I'm afraid of the AIs.
I don't use I don't use a lot of AI if I can.
I I I think a lot of us we key those things in there just to be polite, but I read another article that explained how much money that's actually costing, like
Yeah,
adding that extra word in there.
that's been disproven though.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
not
is it?
true. Yeah,
It's not out
no.
of
Oh,
politeness, it's out of fear. When there are overlords, I want them to remember I was nice to them.
That's what I
Right.
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
probably, it's good to hedge your bets. That's why I try not to use it at all. So that
There
there's
you go.
no memory of
okay.
me.
I
Yeah.
proudly use it.
But oh, JD, when this comes out, it's your book launch party. How are things going for that?
It is, yeah. So the weather looks good, which is great. We've had nothing but rain for like the last week and a half. It's been like
Yeah.
solid, like an inch or two
Wow.
of rain every day. But it finally broke today. Looks like it's going to be sunny for the event. It's going to be like high 50s, low 60s, which is perfect if you're going to be standing on a little island right off the coast. So yeah, it's all coming together. I'm trying to get everybody to RSVP, and those of you who are sitting here right now who have not
Yeah.
RSVP'd yet, I need a yes or no because we need a head count.
Well, it's a
Where
no. I can't go this
I
time,
can't make it
unfortunately.
either. As
I
much
thought
I
as
will
I had
have
already
fun
done
for
that.
all of you.
kills
I'm gonna
me,
eat your portions too.
Yeah.
I can't believe that I can't see a haunted island, but
I was really looking forward to it, but yeah, things just didn't work out. So sorry.
Well, the
Next
number
time.
I'll
the
find that.
total count is teetering between 80 and 100, and we're trying to figure out like that's basically the difference between one ferry or two ferries to bring people back and forth,
Oh,
and
wow.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
so we need to make a decision there. But yeah, it's coming
Wait,
together
hold
really
up.
well.
I'm
I'm so
missing out on ferries?
There's a
Yes.
ferry
Nobody
ride.
said anything about ferries.
I think that the spelling might be slightly different from
Oh
what you're
crap.
picturing.
Yeah.
Sprinkle a little
Uh,
dust. It can take 80 people, but not 100.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry I won't be there, JD. I really wanted to. We tried to make it
uh,
work out. I wanted to make it like a birthday gift for Kara to bring her along, but just wasn't in the cards. Too many things happening.
I've got a life-size Kevin stand-up. I'll just bring
Do
that
it.
out there.
Do
Oh,
it.
Yeah.
perfect.
You're gonna
Yeah.
deep fake me, old school.
I'm gonna check it
Yeah.
over the ferry. I'll get pictures.
Can have kind of a weekend at Bernie's thing going,
Yeah.
you
Nice.
know?
All
Wonderful.
right. I think we've got a listener question,
We
right?
We
do, yeah.
do.
This one's coming from, and I'm gonna pronounce this last name. I went looking to see if I could find where it was pronounced, so I may get this wrong. If I do, I apologize, Alexa. Alexa Big Wharf, from Alexa's Publishing Chat podcast, actually. asked, "What microphone do you use?" I have a good one, but it sounds like trash in comparison to yours.
Well,
Oh,
I have a Shure MV7 USB podcasting mic. That is what I'm currently
That's a
using.
popular one.
Yeah.
Katie sent me this one. I don't where. Let's see.
you've got the same one as Kevin, I think, because I
Yeah,
think Kevin sounded really
I'm
good. So then
sorry.
we got you
Is
one
that
that
what
was
it
the
is?
same as Kevin's.
that's the Samson Q9U, which is
Mm,
currently available for a scant $130 on Amazon, by the way. And I paid twice that when I got it like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah,
So
those are honestly really good for the money. I've got a Shure SM7B,
yeah,
which is like a professional studio mic. But the problem with that is I have to get it, the connection down from the normal studio connection to a USB-C.
yeah,
And I had to buy like this phantom power adapter and like there's all these pieces parts involved in getting it done.
yeah.
They do have a new version of this that actually has power built in. I haven't tried it yet.
oh,
But they're
awesome.
both pricey. I mean, anywhere from like $200 to $400 depending on the model that you get.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I picked this one because it has the XLR output from it as well. So I could
Yeah.
go into a mixer if I wanted to, but it has USB-C built in and it's,
Yeah.
phantom powered on its own. So it's been
Yeah.
it was a good investment. I've used a lot of really high dollar microphones over the years and had a really expensive one just before this, but this came highly recommended
Yeah.
from some other folks I know.
I think the key is not to use a condenser mic like a snowball. Those
Yeah,
are the worst for podcasting because they pick up everything in the room. You need a dynamic mic, whatever you're gonna get.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
All right.
There you
What is
go.
in the news?
All right. Well, first up, and I've watched a lot of videos about this. This is like the Fire Island of author podcast or author conference things. But a Million Lives Books. Let me start that again. A Million Lives Book Festival disappoints authors. Roughly 100 indie romance and fantasy authors paid travel, shipping, and vendor fees, only to face around 40 attendees Saturday and 125 Sunday at Baltimore's A Million Lives Festival, leaving many hundreds to thousands of dollars in the red. Authors report almost no pre-event communication, no signage, conflicting directions, and an empty panel schedule. Videos show a vast convention hall of empty tables and chairs. About 30 people, mostly authors, who paid $250 for the quote black tie ball, found a concrete room with minimal decor, a plate of cookies, and no DJ. Organizer Grace Marceau posted TikToks apologizing and promising refunds by May 31st. Maryland's Four Seasons Books says its name was falsely used as a partner after it declined involvement. Authors now await refunds and reassess the risks of pay-to-play book festivals.
I got
Oh
so
man.
many videos on social media in my feed about
Yeah.
this. Oh, it was just like
Yeah.
empty
It
and
was
sad.
so sad.
Yeah.
That's what's ironic, right? It got way more exposure after than it did
Right.
before.
Yeah.
Was this like the first year they did it, or is this something that's
Yeah.
been around and it just kind of came apart?
No, it's the first year. Didn't they have another one of these in Colorado? Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was another one we talked about. Just
Yeah,
yeah.
and that one was like they had a pretty good attendance, but they just were not prepared for it. They ended up shutting things down before
Yeah.
the readers could actually get into the hall and meet the authors and buy the books. And yeah, that was another
Yeah.
disaster.
Different
So,
problems, but just as
might I
catastrophic.
recommend that if you are planning to put together some sort of, festival or conference around authors and books, that you reach out to Tadra Candle and Mel Jolly, who are the organizers of things like NINC, Writer MBA. They're excellent at this sort of thing. So, free plug for those two.
This is scary stuff. It doesn't, I mean, regardless of which side of it you're on, like if you're the
yeah.
organizer, like
Yeah,
they've got a lot of money out there on the table and now they have to refund people just to try and
Mhm.
make people happy. And that's honestly not going to fix anything. People will get
no,
their money back, but the complaints are already there and lodged. So the problem's not going to go away. So the conference probably will. I mean, anybody who's ever been on the backside of a conference and understands how much work actually goes into creating one and getting it to come off seamless, that is a difficult thing to pull off,
Yeah.
from start to finish. I mean, that was one of the things, honestly, that impressed me about Author Nation, like that kind of turnout and how well it's run, everywhere from the initial email communications all the way to the very end of the conference is
Yeah.
spot on. And that's difficult to find.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's too much work. I have no interest in doing that at all. I used to really want to do something. If I ever did pull something off, I was talking to someone about I was talking to actually Roland Denzel about this a couple of days ago. Like what I'd want to do is more of like a writers meetup thing where everybody just sort of agrees we're going to pay, we're going to come in, we're going to fly to this location, we're all going to pay our own rooms and all that, and we will all just hang out together and write and share stuff and
Retreat.
whatever, like
That's
a
a
retreat.
writer's retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah, not no festivals, no conferences. Those have their place, but
Mhm.
I kind of just that's all I really ever want to do when I go to these conferences anyway, is just hang out with the authors. Spend some time writing. I want to spend time writing, and I want to spend time with other people who are writing. That's
Yeah.
what I want to do.
I mean,
See
that's
the
the one
value.
side of it, but the other
Yeah.
side is connecting with readers too, which is also important.
That's
Yeah.
that's a whole different thing. And I think,
Yeah.
if the conference side of it, there's definitely some conferences out there, and Author Nation, they're doing one now. I mean, they've done it before, but now they're kind of rebranding it as Reader Nation, and it's very focused on getting them in touch with the authors. More power to them, man. I talked to Joe a lot. That is so much work. I want nothing at all to do with the work on that,
Ton of work.
on the work. I will go and participate.
Logistics are funny because when they're done right, they look so easy, right? Like and you go like, oh, I can do this, but logistics is hard. No matter what industry, logistics is the hardest piece that looks the easiest. It's sorcery.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of logistics, Findaway launches INaudio. Spotify is spinning off all of its back-end audio distribution tech into a new standalone company called INaudio. That's INaudio, run by former Findaway leaders. Handover happens August 1st. Current clients shouldn't need to do anything. INaudio says it will stay platform agnostic, adding new distribution analytics and creation tools for publishers, retailers, and indie authors rather than competing with them. The co-founders promised the same, quote, relentless innovation and deep industry relationships that helped make Findaway a key audiobook middleman before Spotify acquired it. Expect continuity and distribution reach, plus faster product upgrades and more retail partners, potentially broader sales channels and data insights for indie and traditional audiobook creators alike. And full disclosure, I've been in an NDA with these guys for the past month or two about this. So I've had lots of conversations about it, some of which I can talk about.
Okay, so let's see if you can explain it, because
We'll see.
Spotify bought Findaway, right?
Yes.
So they bought a standalone audiobook company and merged it into Spotify, and now they're spinning it back off as a standalone. So they're basically bringing it right back where they started.
Yeah.
So did something go wrong here? Like what is the reason
Yes.
for doing that?
The biggest thing was that Spotify found itself in a scenario where it was having to basically serve its own competitors. So, Spotify is its own platform, delivers audiobooks. That was kind of the whole point. And they wanted that technology, and that they wanted to be able to do that. But what they ended up having to do was kind of, bend to the will of like Apple and, Audible and others. So there's kind of a conflict of interest happening there, right? So what Spotify is doing is building their own version, which they've already kind of soft launched this a little. It's like Spotify for authors or something. And then it'll be probably entirely centered on Spotify as the platform. And then, that opened up the opportunity for Findaway to kind of peel voices back out. As for why they're doing the rebrand in audio, I mean, I've kind of asked them about that. I'm not real clear on why they decided to do that. I think maybe because it's sort of linked now with Spotify, so there might have been sort of a confusion there. So maybe that's why they decided to do it. But yeah, it's
I'm starting a list. I don't want to run a conference, and I don't want to start an audiobook
nope.
company.
I'm right there with you.
Parks. Got
Can
it.
we form some sort of corporation where we don't do things? Is there a way to make money by not doing things?
Do not do audiobooks or bookconferences.org.
I think the audiobook their platform and everything, what they built with so fun story. I mean, when they launched Findaway Voices, they came to Draft to Digital. I had been at Draft to Digital for about 2 months when this happened, and we took those guys out to dinner and we discussed, and we had a partnership, and we helped them because Findaways existed for a long time.
Mhm.
They had like this little physical audiobook player that they'd put in libraries, and they sold some of these in stores and stuff. But then they when they started the digital side of that business, they came to Draft to Digital at that point, and we kind of helped them in shaping all that. Like they already had it, they had it pretty much nailed, but we became partners with them, and so one of the pathways into Findaway Voices, one of the first and only pathways for a while, was through Draft to Digital. So I helped them with all that in early days. So it's been really interesting to watch the evolution of this. When they were bought by Spotify, I didn't, I said this to Will Dagus and some others at the time, but I'm like, I think it's a terrible idea. Like I love the reach that you're going to get with this. And I love the exposure, and I love that this is a good thing for the company, but I think it's terrible for you in the long run, but and really kind of terrible for the authors too, because Spotify is this major company. Like they're not going to care as much about the authors as Findaway did, you know? And it turned out that was, I think, pretty true.
No, I mean, it sounds like they were in it for the parts of the machine, right? They probably wanted
That's
a
what I
couple little
think.
pieces of that business and they
Yeah.
bought it, they got those pieces, and now they're just spinning off whatever's left.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what happens. And come August 1st, you'll really see it go. But I've talked to these guys, and there's some really, I mean, honestly, they've got some really cool stuff that they're working on that I can't talk about, but I can tease you and say, it is something I think authors are going to want to remain a part of, because they've got one thing in particular I really am like ridiculously excited about. I can't wait to see that launch.
Awesome.
Wish I could say more.
Okay.
We got one final story here, and we're looping back here on the whole AI deepfake thing. BBC harnesses AI to create writing classes given by Agatha Christie. BBC Maestro's new crime writing course features an AI-generated likeness and restored voice of the late Agatha Christie, assembled from archival interviews, letters, and other writings, dialogue curated by 4 Christie scholars and approved by her estate. Actress Vivian Keane performed mannerisms, VFX artists, and voice cloning tools, then blended her performance with licensed images and historical audio to create realistic lessons covering structure, plot twists, and suspense. Christie's family and BBC Studios call it a respectful, quote, masterclass in her own words. Yet the project highlights growing questions around posthumous AI recreations, consent, and the impact on living writers' livelihoods. Even more, AI resurrected literary icons in branded courses. I'm sorry, expect more of those. An emerging revenue stream for estates and platforms, and a signal that understanding licensing, voice likeness rights, and AI ethics is becoming part of the modern author's toolkit. If you're not familiar with it, BBC Maestro is kind of like the masterclass. If you've seen those, like the Dan Brown and James Patterson masterclass thing. This is the British version,
But
Yeah.
with fake people.
Yeah.
but with some real people, but also with a fake person. So far, only
Oh.
one that I know about, but
Real
pretty
people
big one.
being
Yeah.
fake people who were real people but are now dead.
Yeah.
That's the
I'd
title of
be
my next
curious
book,
to
by the
chart.
way.
I'd like to watch those numbers over the years. Like I know Lee Child's got one on there. There's a few good ones on that platform.
Yeah.
But like how many more of these, these deep fake type versions are going to creep in there? Like right now there's one. Like what's that percentage going to look like 5 years from now? Like is it going to be skewed to AI? Like, they're going to resurrect like all the dead authors?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
I'll watch
and
Charles Dickens, but like you don't know what you're really watching, right? Like I mean, this is
Right.
hopefully they've been responsible in how they put it together, but like they can literally fake anything, and like we think we're listening to this person, it feels like you're listening to that person, but they're putting words in that person's mouth, you know, from start to finish, and like they
Yeah.
can put whatever words there they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to mention this was sent in by a listener too, Sam London, who sent us a couple things. Thanks, Sam. Wanted to know
Thanks,
what we
Sam.
thought about this.
Yeah,
But I'm kind of with you on that. Like, would I actually say that? I don't know. They have all these I don't know what I'm gonna say every day. How can scholars know what I'm gonna say?
So, I mean,
I'm
they
chaos.
did go to a great deal of effort to the things that she's saying are things that she has said or wrote,
Yeah.
in various communications. And so I feel like there is a little bit of responsibility being taken there, and the fact that they went to the estate and got, her,
Yeah.
I think her grandson or somebody, my friend Dave Cullen has a YouTube channel, the Dave Cullen Show, and he did a whole episode on this, and he's just sickened by the whole idea of resurrecting people, even if you have the family's permission. I kind of see where he's coming from. It's like you have no idea whether Agatha Christie would have approved of this. You only have,
Yeah.
so her image is being slaved to this concept. Now, if someone agreed to something like this up front before they passed, that's a different story. But he's very opposed to the idea of like resurrecting actors and this is far from the first time this has happened, but
You know, I
this is being approved by the people who are collecting the paycheck from it being approved.
Yes.
right.
So they're not exactly
Exactly.
non-biased. Like
That's true.
we could end up seeing Napoleon talking to Joan of Arc about the art of war. Like there's so many
Yeah.
different twists on this kind of thing they could do.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it's a cool idea, and I have seen it where like they have used AI like when they were trying to make like those interactive glasses a thing where you could like go to an ancient Roman site and put
Yeah.
these glasses on, and now you're seeing the ruins the way they would have been, reconstructed and sort of
Yeah.
like. And I think that's interesting, and I think it's interesting if you were to recreate like Marcus Aurelius and have him talk about the things that he wrote in Meditations. I think it gets kind of weird with Agatha Christie, not that it's saying the things that she would say, but this is a class, right? So it's sort
Yeah.
of like, it's not exactly like, interacting with like an AI version who is just saying the words that we know she said in certain context. It's
The thing is,
weird, I
we
guess.
have had things like this for years in the
Yeah.
form of an actor playing
Right.
that person. And
Mhm.
so I think the only thing that's given anybody the heebie-jeebies right now is that they actually took the person's likeness and voice and
Yeah.
replicated it. But if they had found somebody who just happened to have an uncanny, look and sound, that matched Agatha Christie and had her do this, would we even question it?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a problem with this at all. I have no issues personally. And if somebody wants to do it for me when I'm dead, more power to you, because it doesn't matter anymore. I don't think the person who died cares, right? Like even if even if in the afterlife they're looking down on this and slapping their ghost head about it, I think that it doesn't matter, because what you've got now is, sure, there's people who are going to profit off this. There's people who may do unscrupulous things with this sort of technology, but what they're doing is helping to teach the next generation of writers to be better writers. I think that she would probably be okay with that.
Fair enough. Like from a learner's side, I like audio learning, nonfiction stuff like this. So I like having it that way versus having to read it. So
Yeah.
from that perspective, I like it, but
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Plus, I grew up as an avid fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation and the holodeck, and so to me, this is just inevitable. I've been
There you
waiting
go.
for this for years.
Fair enough.
Hey, this is Kevin Tumlinson, and it seems to me like you might need a little help. Maybe hand off all that stuff that's keeping you from writing. At Author Anchor, we connect authors with skilled, affordable virtual assistants trained specifically for the publishing world. Your personal VA handles everything from book production to marketing and social media, freeing you up to focus on what matters most, your writing. Book a discovery call today and we'll find that perfect VA for you. Plus, mention the Writers Inc. podcast and you'll get $50 off your first month. Visit authoranchor.com and get matched with your personal VA so you can just write.
All right. On that, JD, who is up this week?
This week we've got Joe Abercrombie coming on. Joe's a freelance film editor who works on documentaries and live music events. He's also a New York Times bestselling author. His latest novel is called The Devils and releases May 13th. Here he is, Joe Abercrombie.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to talk to you about your work and The Devils. It's a very
Me
fun
too.
book.
Honor and a privilege, obviously, to be on here.
Yeah, so before we kind of get into that, I wonder, we like to start at the beginning. Obviously, we have a lot of writers listening. So what is your writer origin story? How did you get started?
So, I started, I suppose I read a lot as a kid. That's where most writers begin, I guess. Read a lot of fantasy, Lord of the Rings, you might have heard of. And as a kind of fantasy of the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. And always kind of had a kind of wish in the back of my mind to write something of my own, and kind of flirted with that idea off and on over my childhood. Probably wouldn't want to share any of those bits of juvenilia now, I wouldn't have thought, except the ones I've already published, of course.
Right.
And then sort of
for the end.
Yeah. When I've really run out of anything else to publish, I can maybe trot them out. In my 20s, after I finished university, I kind of I had a bit of time before I got started in life and thought I'd have a go at writing my own take on the classic epic fantasy trilogy. But it was not very good, even by my assessment. It was pretty terrible. And so I kind of put it aside, didn't think about it much, and then started working, became a freelance film editor. I was working in the TV business mostly. And a friend of mine gave me this book and said, "You used to read a lot of fantasy. You should give this a try. This is interesting." And it had a knight on the cover and a wizard and a pretty princess. And I thought, I know what this is like. I know how this goes. And it was Game of Thrones. A Game of Thrones, I should say, George R. R. Martin, obviously.
Nice.
And that kind of book really blew my doors off in the 90s when I first read it, because it felt as if it was very, recognizably classic epic fantasy in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it had this kind of character focus and this shocking quality to it, this grittiness, that I just was exactly what I felt the genre had been missing a bit. That it was surprising and shocking, but did all the kind of things I loved about epic fantasy very well at the same time. And so I thought, oh, this is exciting.
Right.
I should have a go myself. And so I had another go not long after that. And straight away, it started coming out just with a very different tone. It had been very pompous the first time around, and I think I'd learned to take myself a lot less seriously. I'd read a lot of other stuff outside of the genre since and kind of broadened my taste and my influences a bit. And it just straight away had this kind of tongue-in-cheek quality, a sort of honesty, I suppose, in a way, that I found really fascinating. It was like, when I would read it back, it was like kind of reading something I'd written, but kind of reading something entirely from outside of myself,
Yeah.
And I just got really excited at the act of writing in a way, and for its own sake, sort of dissecting every scene as I was writing it and working out what I was doing with it and experimenting with different styles and different approaches. And I think right from that moment, I felt like I would always be writing stuff. I had no idea whether it'd actually go anywhere from a professional standpoint at that point, but I had the bug. And it has not totally left me since, at least.
Not totally.
Not totally.
That's really interesting. Do you think that the experience in TV, even though it wasn't writing, it was still sort of, editing is crafting a story in a different way, I suppose. Do you think that also sort of helped with that second go around, like sort of cement things maybe somewhere in your brain that you didn't have before?
Oh yeah, I think definitely. And I think everything you do in life and experience and everything you read or watch or play or kind of do in a way sort of finds its way into the soup you have in your head that you sort of distilled, and you turn the tap and it drips out onto the page in a way.
Right.
And so the editing definitely was, yeah, a big influence, because I spent a lot of time doing documentaries, and so I'd sit with directors and with producers while they wrote scripts, and I'd cut to the scripts they wrote, and the script and the pictures would inform each other, and I'd see, the process of boiling things down and trying to get things to the most elegant form of words. And so that was a useful experience. But also I think the kind of the skill of pacing something, of kind of structuring a scene, is often universal to a degree. It's obviously different when you're working with pictures, but when you're an editor of film and of TV, you kind of learn this approach to where you come in and out of a shot, where you come in and out of a scene, what's essential and what can be lost. And so I think it taught me an awful lot about pacing and how to cut away what's not important and focus on the things that are, and kind of how to structure an arresting shape to a sequence and to a scene. And that, I think, has been very important, even if I wasn't kind of always consciously thinking, how about what I was doing. Instinctively, those things are there. And so, whereas in my first effort, I would have been tempted to kind of start with the big, here's a description of the place, and then the small, here's a description of the person and what the person's doing, and then to some dialogue, and develop it in a very foursquare way. I think the experience with editing had kind of made me realize, well, you can start on the door slam, you can start on the arresting piece of dialogue, on the arresting thought of the character, and then structure things from there, and trust the reader to pick it up, and that the reader will be more excited by the kind of discovery of what's happening in the scene than they are by having it kind of all laid out in a very obvious order, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That learning how to, what can be lost, what's necessary, what's not. I do think studying film or shows or anything actually visual, I think really teaches you that, because you can't really linger unless it's on purpose. But yeah, that's really interesting. So you wrote your novel and you thought, oh, this is pretty good.
Well, I thought two things simultaneously, which is, this is absolutely stupendous and the best thing that's ever been written, and also this is absolute crap.
Right.
So
yes,
I both was kind of thought, this is interesting and exciting and I love it, but I also couldn't really believe that anyone else would ever be interested.
Yeah. So did you start querying agents, like cold querying? How did that process work for you?
I did. This was 1714 was the year, and so it was a very different time in publishing. The printing press had just come in.
Right.
It was 2003, 2004. So it might as well be 1715,
right,
in the way the industry has changed. I mean, there was not really any internet then to speak of. I mean, the internet was there, but there was none of the infrastructure of kind of chat rooms and advice and all that stuff that's there. And all the querying was done by post,
Right.
The way you did things then was you looked through the Writers and Artists Yearbook to find some agents who represented the kind of work you thought you'd produced. And you wrote a cover letter and you sent off whatever sample they asked for with a self-addressed envelope in the packet. And then 6 weeks later, you'd see your own self-addressed envelope come, back through the door when you got home from work. It'd be there on the mat and you'd think, oh dear, that's another rejection. And so, yeah, it was very long-winded. I mean, obviously it's no easier today, but it's just technically works in a slightly different way. And what I was unprepared for was, I'd somehow imagined this will make an impact. People will be thrilled, or they'll be upset. They'll be damaged by contact with my dangerous, edgy, explosive fiction. But of course, what you get is a completely neutral, photocopied slip of paper saying,
For me, thanks.
exactly, your work / book / leaflet may be suitable for someone else at some time, but it's not suitable for us now. Thanks anyway. Bye.
Yeah.
And so I did about 5 or 6 of those, at which point I think I'd more or less exhausted the list of agents who seemed highly appropriate. It was obviously a much smaller pool back then, I
Right.
think, the kind of science fiction and fantasy scene. So there were only about half a dozen that seemed highly suitable, that specialized in that field. And I was kind of then taking stock a little bit, thinking, maybe I wrote the wrong thing here. Maybe I should think about writing something that is a bit more aimed at being publishable rather than just being a kind of sprawling mess, that was my weird imitation of Lord of the Rings, Maybe I
Yeah.
should think of something tight and simple that is commercially viable and try and sell that. That was about where I was at.
Commercially
that point.
viable.
Yeah, it seemed like an idea. But the thing is, I had very little guidance. I didn't know if, none of the agents had really expressed much interest. So I didn't know if it was just completely the wrong type of book for the period, or if it was too gritty or too funny or too weird a combination of the two. Or, I mean, too unfunny, I suppose, would be the way to put it. I didn't know if it was the tone was wrong or the writing was bad or anything. So it's a little
Right.
bit of a difficult kind of position to find yourself in, which probably a lot of writers do find themselves in.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes the most frustrating part. I mean, it's understandable. Sometimes the not for me, thanks is like the best. But sometimes it is like, well, I mean, what is wrong with it? And that can be quite hard to find. So how
Yeah.
did you find your agent?
Well, I found my publisher first,
Oh,
unusually, because a friend of mine, a friend of my brother's, chiefly, weirdly, he was aware that I was doing it, because I'd been talking about it, and to begin with, I was incredibly secretive about it, and then gradually shared it with direct family members, and then started to talk a little bit more about the fact I was kind of doing it. And this guy he worked for an educational publisher. And he ended up on a desk editing course. And on that course, he met someone called Gillian Redfearn, who was an assistant editor at Gollancz, had just started there, really, or been there a few months. And when he realized she was at a sci-fi and fantasy imprint, he kind of, blessings to him, has said, "Oh, this friend of mine is writing a fantasy book. Would you look at it?" And she said, "Oh, all right, I'll look at it." Because I think she'd only just started. She perhaps hadn't quite had all the enthusiasm crushed out of her at that point.
right.
And so she agreed to have a look at it. And she looked at a few chapters and then asked for some more. And I think at that point I had the whole first book, to some degree. And so she read the rest of the book and asked for a kind of treatment for the whole trilogy, which meant I had to actually think about what the whole trilogy was going to be. I mean, I had some thoughts, but I never really codified it or written it down. And then I got an offer a week later,
Wow. That's
a
awesome.
life-changing offer of, I think it was £7,500 a book.
Wow.
The
Yeah.
three.
Incredible.
Yes,
Did you
I know.
have your first yacht?
Absolutely. Well,
Right.
that was my second yacht at that
Oh,
point.
of
Yeah.
course.
No,
I
I mean,
apologize.
so it's not a life-changing thing, but at the same time, it was, significant enough that I could think, okay, now I can take this seriously and take a few weeks off work a year to kind of focus. Because I was freelance, I was very lucky in that sense that my work was quite modular and I had time off to work on it regardless. Even in busy times, not every job would fit together. So I had time to kind of mess around. And then I got an agent after that. And it was actually way easier once I had a deal on the table to find an agent. You'll be surprised to
See
learn.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, just get an offer first, and then the agents just come right to your door.
Well, it's easier, that's for sure. And of course, because most of the agents had already turned me down already, it was a
Right.
relatively small shortlist from which to pick. but yeah, and my agent has been with me ever since, and Gillian, my editor, has we've been working together ever since as well. So it's
That's
been
incredible.
very good relationships right from the start.
That's awesome. So you tend to write very sprawling novels that,
I write focused fiction where
you,
not a word is wasted, I'll have you know. Yes,
yeah,
sprawling, admittedly, yeah, they are quite sprawling,
they
yeah.
are, well, not in the wasted word sprawling, just in, they're
Mm.
very epic in scope. They cover a lot of ground and they
Yeah.
have a lot of characters and there's a lot of moving parts. So um do you plot that out ahead of time, or do you just sort of sit down and start writing and see where it goes?
It varies a bit with book to book, and it's developed a bit over time. So I probably did plan. I mean, when I very first started, I just was experimenting with scenes and messing around, and so I didn't have much of a plan. And after I'd written a few chapters that way, I thought, right, I better come up with some sort of plan. And so I started to plan in a loose way. And then when I was asked for this treatment for the whole thing, I obviously had to plan it in some detail, but it was kind of in my head really by that stage anyway. And because that first trilogy was quite consciously epic fantasy and hitting some of the milestones of epic fantasy, the shape was sort of dictated in a sense.
Right.
And then with subsequent books, I got into quite rigorous planning. But I discovered over time that I work best when I plan a bit and then write a bit and then plan a bit more, because
Hmm.
the writing informs the planning and vice versa. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you can plan a lot, but with the best will in the world, you don't quite know what the characters are going to feel like till you start actually writing. And so I like to get a few chapters down quite early and see how that feels. And then I tend to split a book into parts and plan each one quite carefully as I get to it. So I'll have a loose idea where I'm going. And then with each part, I plan it in more detail. So as with the book I'm writing now, you find that it's a complete mess initially. Or it's kind of nice initially because it's fun and new and you do exciting things.
Yeah.
And then you get in the middle and you're like, this is an absolute mess now. And
Yeah.
then as you get towards the end, it starts to kind of take shape and come together and you think, okay, I know what I'm doing now. That's the hope anyway. And
Right.
by the time you've completely finished, then you can look at it and say, right now, I sort of know what I need to do to thrash this into shape.
Yeah, I like that approach a lot, having like an overall outline, but then I try to break things into acts too. So it's like, all right, now act one is
Mm,
like really get detailed in it, which kind of helps. And then kind of get to the end of that and look at the outline and say, does it even still make sense? And fix whatever meandering I did,
yeah.
whatever.
I think giving it that sort of act structure, hopefully, as well, means that if you're writing big books, certainly, there are there's a sort of rhythm to it as you
Mhm.
go, rather than it being all a big mess that then comes together in a big denouement at the end. It gives it some up and down, some sense of kind of, you know, waves up a beach, each one of which gets a bit higher in terms of the pace and the kind of
Yeah,
resolution. So that my first book was quite a shapeless mess, honestly, uh, because I was thinking of it very much as an act one of something much bigger.
right.
Now I tend to think much more about how, the pace is going to work all the way through and try and give it a little bit more structure as I go. That's the hope anyway.
Yeah. Do you know which characters you're gonna write from at the start, or is that something that you kind of discover as you're in that exploratory phase?
A little bit of both, but I mean, because I'm very character focused and point of view focused generally, that's probably the main thing I need to know.
Hmm.
And I suppose I'm also trying to balance the cast up a little bit and get a range of voices and different types of people. So the style's going to be varied, as you go through. You wouldn't want to have six posh men as your six point of views. You'd want to have hopefully some variety of gender and type and background so that, the style and the language is varied and the attitudes are different and complementary. I guess that's the point. So that's probably the main thing I'm thinking about at the start is what the points of view are going to be. And I suppose the very first thing is roughly what's the story, what's the basic kind of layout here, but then very soon after that, that will suggest what the points of view might be, and then who the points of view are as you develop that will further inform what the action is going to be and what the concerns of those people are, how they're sort of drawn into the plot, if you like.
Yeah. So I want to shift a little bit to the Devils just because I had just started reading it and it was like,
Oh,
I mean, a riot of fun from beginning to
that was
end.
the idea. Right, of fun. Love that. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
plan.
One of the things you do that I had a lot of fun with is sort of playing with different tropes, not just in the fiction world of the genre, but, even things like who can be the savior, who can be the pope, just these different elements. And I just wondered if you could talk about that a little bit. Like, how do you decide what elements of a story or a character or a tradition that you're going to subvert ahead of time? Do you sort of like go into it kind of being like, I want to write a child pope, or do you that just kind of happens and then you're like, oh, that's a lot of fun, and you just kind of go with it?
I mean, it's a bit of both. Certainly, when I started writing, I wasn't thinking to myself, "Oh, I'm gonna subvert some tropes here." Oh, I got a list of tropes, and then I tick them off one by one as I subverted them successfully within the text. I just wasn't thinking about that at all. I mean, I was thinking I like epic fantasy, and I want to write my take on it. That includes my feelings and opinions on things, but chiefly, I just wanted to write a good epic fantasy more than anything with interesting characters, and that maybe had the kind of gritty approach that I'd seen in a lot of noir and Western fiction and kind of enjoyed and thought that would why aren't people doing that in fantasy necessarily? So yeah, it was never the idea to subvert tropes, but I guess in wanting to write something surprising and a bit of a different take, you end up doing that. I guess I was thinking a bit of things like, well, firstly, A Fistful of Dollars, spaghetti westerns as compared to original westerns, if you like. John Ford westerns, say, the big setting, the small characters in the huge landscape, perhaps more of a white hat and a black hat, straightforward morality. And then the spaghetti westerns are sort of, it's a reaction against that, but it's not a disrespectful one. It's a desire to do something different within something you already love, So, but it has much more morally ambiguous characters. It's all told in sweaty close up with the stubbly beards, and it's no more realistic. In fact, if anything, it's less realistic. I mean, it's absurd that the world of A Fistful of Dollars. It's not like, well, it's not even shot in Mexico, right? It's shot in Italy or Spain or whatever. But it's a kind of ultra realistic, but it's unrealistic, but a kind of hyper, large than life exaggeration of the things that aren't in traditional westerns. And then you have something like Unforgiven, which is a very conscious imitation of a western, but with all these changes to it, where it's a kind of grittier take, a re-examination, ask questions about the purpose a Western story serves for audiences and so on. And so I was thinking about all those things in terms of fantasy. And, I guess those are films that all play with tropes in a sense. And I was wanting to do a similar sort of thing. But the balance of how much has to be the same and how much can be different is a tricky one. Generally, you've got to seem to be the thing you're playing with before you can play with it. You've got to make people feel like they're in a setting where they know what's going to happen. So what's so effective about Game of Thrones, I mean, still now, but at the time, amazingly so, is that you feel like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this is.
Oh,
this is familiar.
Sure.
And so I know exactly what's going to come and how it's going to develop. And then, of course, it blows the doors off when you don't get that. I think it's hard now, so many years on, 20, 30 years on now, to kind of remember how profound that was at the time, because it's become such a kind of a trope of its own, really, in a sense, because Game of Thrones is so well known. But it certainly was at the time. And so I don't know, you write the things you like, and you kind of mess with the things you don't and try and do them a little bit differently. I think if you write point of view as well, and you're very internal in the character's thoughts, inevitably that's a useful tool to kind of look at what's going on under the hood. So,
Mhm.
the guy who fills the role of the wonderful knight, the noble knight, what are really his motivations? What is he really thinking? Is he actually a little bit disgusting when you drill into why he's doing things and what he thinks about things and feels about things? So that's always fun as well, the kind of internality, and when you try and make the people feel a bit more real and conflicted and kind of complex.
Yeah, that I will say I loved that in the Devils. Like just everyone was so it was very fun shifting from, one to the next to the next. And, one of the things that you did was you don't just switch perspectives like chapter to chapter. I mean, you do it in the same scene a lot of times. And
Yeah.
you do it without managing to break the tension or the flow, or, it never is jolting. Like it just feels so natural. So how how do you write those scenes to maintain that fluidity? Because I imagine that's not exactly easy to do.
I actually do find it quite easy to do. Well, not easy, maybe is the wrong word, but I find it quite natural. And I mean, usually I choose to do a scene kind of between several characters. The Devil has this shape; it's a four-act structure, and each act ends with a big fight, basically. And so those big long action scenes, which get more and more ludicrous and extravagant, um, are naturally kind of broken up into little moments with the different characters. Often, if some of them are together, some of them will be separated, doing their own thing. And I suppose in that case, you just try and write what feels natural. Sometimes I'll do a multi kind of point of view within a conversation or within some kind of big event that isn't necessarily action. Um, and usually it's because I feel like seeing things from both sides or from different angles is sort of interesting and informative. And so there'll be a thread of action going through. I suppose like a director in a sense, you're thinking, right, what's the best angle to take on this action now? Only it's from in terms of the point of view, in
Mhm.
point of the characters you've got. So who's going to have an interesting thought about what's happening now? Who's got a different take on it? So if there's a battle going on, do you have a professional soldier who can give you the technician's viewpoint on what's happening, who can be a little bit detached, professional, experienced, can understand exactly what's going on from a distance? And then do you maybe want a point of view who's much more of a naive person kind of caught up in the madness, who has much more of a terrified, messy stream of consciousness reaction to things, and kind of, you pick the best camera, the best shot at the best moment to show what you want. And through all the cameras you have, all the shots you have, you build up the whole picture of the event, if you like. So it's always just seemed, I'm coming back to the editing again, as you can see,
Right,
but it
yeah, no.
always just seemed like the natural way to tell a story to me. And a lot of it's instinctive, and a lot of it's planning, in the sense of you break it down and think what's the best bit to tell from the different characters' points of view, what's the best character to tell the different bits, what gives you a nice spread and a nice kind of balance of the different voices that you've got. Um, what's fun generally is what you come back to. And then a lot of it is in the editing, so it's a bit of a truism to say that most writing is editing, but I spend a lot of time revising and going over and rethinking stuff, and kind of trying to get all the character voices as strong and defined as I can. And so you hope to plan it well. You slog through the writing is usually quite unpleasant. The drafting, I don't enjoy that so much. And
Oh,
then you revise afterwards, and that's when hopefully it comes together.
I do prefer editing. Drafting has always been, it's very tedious
The
sometimes.
editing is like Michelangelo, tapping out the statue. The first draft is like
Yeah.
digging the block of marble out of the ground, right? It's just
Oh,
hard
I
work.
agree. I so agree. Well, as we wrap this up,
Sure.
And I would highly encourage everyone to get a copy of the Doubles because it
Oh,
is,
as would I. Even more so, if anything.
yes, it is, yes, ludicrous, violent fun. Absolutely. So if that's your jam. But what piece of advice, what's one piece of advice you would give to newer aspiring writers?
Well, I suppose there's a technical one of don't give up the day job, certainly. I mean, it
Right.
certainly helps to have a job that is a bit flexible and that gives you enough time to kind of, commit a bit of time to your writing. In terms of the actual technicality of the writing, I think, well, my mother gave me a brilliant piece of writing advice, which was be honest.
Yeah.
She read some metaphor I'd used, which was, the stars were like diamonds spread across a sable cloth or something along those lines. And she read that and was, I mean, always ask yourself, is that true? You know, does the sky look like diamonds on a sable cloth, or is that a kind of cheesy thing to fill the space? Whenever you use a metaphor, ask yourself, right, is that true? Is that clean and defined? And when you really think about it, is it real? Does it make sense? And when people, use a line of dialogue, think, is that how people talk? Is that what that person would say in that circumstance? It's not just there to fill the space. It's not just kind of a cliche, really. Always be asking, is that how the thing really feels? Is that what it's like? And that's always a good, I think, habit to be into because it helps the writing feel kind of crisp and interesting. I really love books where I read them and I feel like there's an exciting voice there, and I'm constantly being arrested by things I've got to think about and think, well, that's
Yeah.
exciting. That's interesting. I never thought of that. So, I think trying to stay honest is always the key to good writing to a
Yeah.
degree.
No, I agree. That's a good one. Well, thank you so much for your time.
It's a
And
pleasure.
yeah, I think this comes out same day as the Double. So look at that timing.
Perfect timing.
Hey.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll try and link up and all that usual stuff.
Right. All right. All right. So he's fun to talk to. Um, he kind of brought something up that I thought was really interesting because we have talked a lot about like blending genres before, but I don't know if we've necessarily just talked about like plucking bits and pieces from a genre, that is not done in your genre. Um, do you guys have those things, like taking specific elements from one genre, not necessarily blending the whole genre, but just um taking those pieces and weaving them into your own work?
I've done it a little bit. So like in my 4MK series, I added, there's some pretty graphic stuff in there. And like the type of graphic, like descriptions that I had of some of the murders, you would typically only find in a horror novel. You wouldn't find in a thriller. But because of that, like it feels like the reader feels like they're being pushed just a little further over that edge. And they tend to, they tend to appreciate that it's, just a little bit more than what they're used to.
I kind of feel like thriller is the genre that does this the most, frankly. I know
Yeah.
that I do this in my books. There's all kinds. You could. I started my writing life as a science fiction writer. So when I started writing thrillers, I mean, I started writing thrillers on a dare. So I wrote it from the perspective of, I'm just using what I know, using what I do, and a lot of the elements of my thrillers, if you looked at them in the right light, are really just science fiction, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, of all the genres, that one probably does it the most. But now you're seeing it with like there's the whole romantasy and things like people are doing mashups on purpose now.
Yeah. I mean, I think with thrillers it's easier. So yeah, I dropped the sci-fi spec fic in, I dropped the romance in. But now I'm really thinking about it after he said that. Like what do they do in other genres they don't do in what I'm writing and what can I take? I've been
Yeah, like
thinking about
would
that
you
actually.
Let's
do like
pilfer it.
a showdown, like that, like in a Western, because
Like a
he talks about
Western.
Western. So like, not necessarily trying to make it a Western, but just taking like that one, like I'm gonna have a showdown in an alley. I think that's kind of interesting
Well,
to
yeah,
think
Why
about.
look at
not?
Indiana Jones. There was that scene where he's facing off and the guy comes out and he's got the sword and he's going crazy and Indy's got his whip and then suddenly he just takes his pistol out and shoots him. That was a
Yeah.
showdown.
Yeah,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
mean Westerns are great because they were the most popular pulp fiction for a long time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you can drop that into anything.
Han
Maybe a
shot
train
first,
heist in my
showdown.
thriller. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like it. A
Great.
nice train heist.
Greg
Fascinating.
Hurwitz just did that in his latest Orphan X book. Like the whole thing
Yeah.
is basically Western themed. You know, the two
Yeah.
guys kind of facing off against each other.
That's very
And
cool.
the train thing, like I don't know if you've read the latest Riley Sager book yet, but that's where
Oh, I
his
have
book
it. Don't
takes place
spoil
on
it.
a train.
Oh, he already beat me to it. Nice
He
job.
beat
We'll
you
talk
to
about
it.
that when I interview him.
Nice. So I liked that Game of Thrones sort of sparked his reintroduction into writing in the way that it just sort of like shocked, which it shocked everyone, I think, for a lot of reasons. What book sort of shocked you in a way that then inspired you to write in a different way?
Oh, you'll be sick of hearing me say it, but it was Perdido Straight Station for me. But it was just at a time when I was reading epic fantasy that was all the same flavor. And then when
Mm.
I read that one, I was like, what the hell? I need to read more of
What
this, please.
is this?
It's so wild. Yeah. And I
And
think, thinking differently, because Jenna always teased me, like, why do you like to read that? Like, you like genre that's fast paced. And that's more like being dropped into a surrealist painting and just not knowing what it's about, but enjoying it anyway. So
Mm.
that was a
Well,
cool
it's just
experience.
more that you don't like it from almost anybody else. I think that's why it's
That's
funny
because
to
they're
me.
boring. You have to make it good.
Okay.
My the book that launched it off for me was Ender's Game, and yeah, that goes all the way back. I was in like ninth grade when I read that book, and
Yeah.
at the time, it wasn't the ending of that book, and I won't
It was
spoil
a
it.
shock.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
surprising, and it was
Yeah.
kind of new back then, and it's really sort of infuriating now to hear people. I've watched people talk about that book now, and they're like, it's got such a cliche ending. Like I saw it coming
Right.
from a million miles away. Yeah, but not in 1985 or whatever
Yeah.
when that thing
They've
came
been saying
out.
the same thing about like Wheel of Time. They're like all the tropes. I'm like, it came out first before all
That
this
it
stuff
created the
Yeah.
tropes.
that you're
Yeah.
comparing it to.
That book made me realize, though, I had this epiphany because I was an avid reader, but I had this epiphany after reading that one, and because it hit something in me, and I went and read like everything Orson Scott Card ever wrote. This was before he was problematic, but I read, if his name appeared as just one of the people who recommended a book, I read that whole
Yeah.
book,
It was the same
and
for me.
so
Yeah.
it made me realize though that like human beings write books. The people who write these books are human, and I'm human, and I like stories, and I've been writing things all my life anyway. This is something I can do, and so yeah, it just launched everything for me.
I need to go read Ender's Game.
Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't read Ender's Game?
I've never read it. It's on
I
my shelf. You know, I just never
It's a
never
quick
opened it.
read. Yeah.
It
it
is
is a quick
Is it?
read.
It
I
would be
actually read it in
interesting to
like
see what you think about it now.
I
Yeah.
would be curious because
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I assume it holds up. It feels like it holds up to me because I reread it like once a year. But it is probably the book that had the single most influence on my writing voice too early on. I mean I've evolved since then. But
Yeah.
I just adored that book, and then I read everything that came after, and it just progressively the series that followed got so kind of crappy. But the
Yeah.
that book and Speaker for the Dead, I would recommend to any budding writer.
So I'm just keeping my list of things we need to twist JD's arm to do. So it's that and our Princess Bride movie watch marathon.
Okay. All right. Good.
Oh
I'm
boy.
glad someone's keeping track of all this. Um,
Like we're from different planets, JD. I don't even understand who you are anymore.
I'll read it. All right, I'll
was
read it.
interesting that what got him started, and we've heard this before from different people, but film editing, but specifically on teaching him where to start the story. Instead of sort of starting at that big and, kind of going down, it's like, start at that small moment. When did you figure out where to start a story? And then how do you figure out with each book where to start the story?
I write a really boring first chapter and then I delete it.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's actually a good technique. I think that's a
Yeah.
good one.
I've mentioned that before when I was doing the book doctor stuff. Almost every time I would delete that first chapter because it's usually the author trying to feel their way around. They're trying to establish some kind of world and set the scene. But it's not necessarily like it doesn't necessarily need to be there. A lot of times you can nix it, start with the action that happens in chapter 2, and then sprinkle in the rest, somewhere else down the story.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, the method is really some form of in media res, right? Like you want to start
Yeah.
in some kind of action, and I think the stuff I do for the Dan Collar books came primarily from TV and from like like mostly like detective shows and anything that opens with like that has a sort of mystery component to it. And think shows like Castle, right? There's always that cold open that sometimes it has nothing at all to do with the characters, but it's like the victim is being chased or, something happens and they're murdered, and now you got to figure out who did it and how they did it and why they did it and all that. And now you shift over to the main characters. And so for my Kotler books, I do something very much like that for every book. And then with the others, it's usually, like Alex Kane, I'll have her meeting a client in the middle or something.
Well, the takeaway I got from it, honestly, was that he was a film editor,
Yeah.
because those people they don't get a whole lot of credit, I think, for what they do because they just kind of fall behind the scenes and it's seamless. But they're whittling away at that story, piecing these
Yeah.
little things together in the perfect order, and it can make or break something. There's a show called Citadel, which is
Mm.
got a huge story, huge budget, but the way it was edited, I think, kind of broke it up in a way where it didn't work. But like you could rehash it and you could re-edit it, but like editors are trained to get rid of the fluff and just kind of dive directly into the story, and sprinkle those pieces out in the perfect order. They take this section, they shuffle it over here, they watch it. If it doesn't work, they move it over here. I think subconsciously, like that gets ingrained in your head. So if you take that same knowledge and put it into a book, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen the shift when was a newer writer, or not that much newer, probably even a few years ago. You write your first draft and you're like, that's great. And you don't know what to do with it. But like he said, I'm like, this is good. And then you have someone read it and they're like, it's not that good. But most writing is editing.
Yeah.
And it's just something that I've learned now. I can look at a first draft and go, oh, this needs to go, this needs to go,
Yeah.
this needs to change. I need to put this in. It's a whole different skill set.
I'm going to tell you, most of my career, I absolutely hated that phrase that writing is editing and writing is rewriting. I hated it. I resented it.
I did too, but
fought
I'm
it.
finding it true now.
It's absolutely true. So
Yeah.
when I'm talking to there's someone out there's a writer out there right now who thinks that, who's just rolling their eyes. I'm talking to you.
Yeah. But if they
Just
write for
suck
5
it up.
years, they won't think that in 5
Yeah.
years. We'll see where
Because
they're
if
at.
you want your books to be, your book can be good without that as your mantra. If you
Yeah.
want your book to be excellent, then that's the thing. That's the path. So I'm talking to you, other Kevin, other one who's like me.
Yeah. That and stay honest, right? That's
Stay
what he said. All right. With that, JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Anthony Horowitz coming back on. Anthony's an English screenwriter and novelist. He regularly tops all the bestseller lists. His latest novel is called The Marble Hill Murders and releases May 13th. Anthony Horowitz.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to Writers Inc. podcast and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.